On my birthday, my kids abandoned me for their new mother, so I spent the $1 million I had saved for their gift. I won $20 million in this year's lotto, and because my 66th birthday was only a week away, I intend to show my kids this amazing surprise when they visit. When my birthday finally came, I sat at the dining table, staring at the spread of carefully prepared dishes, waiting and waiting. By 10 o'clock that night, neither Logan nor Luna had arrived, so I called them both several times, but no one answered. And a creeping uneasiness settled in my chest that afternoon around 3 o'clock. I had everything planned out. After taxes, I would take the remaining winnings and buy a luxury home for each of them, my son Logan and my daughter Luna, and on top of that, I would write each of them a check for $1 million. For Luna had called to let me know that she might be home later than expected because she had to stay late at work. Shortly after, Logan texted me to let me know that he would also be delayed because of a problem with a project he was managing. I didn't give it much thought at the time. I just told them that work came first. However, it was now 10:30 minutes ago, and I had sent a message in our family WhatsApp group asking when they would be arriving, but it was still marked as unread. With a heavy heart, I pushed back my chair and moved to the couch on the coffee table, where 2 real estate contracts and 2 checks for a luxury home were lying. They always say that wealth shouldn't be flaunted, so I decided to take the lump sum payout even though it meant losing 40% to taxes, which still left me with over $10 million. I had been waiting all day to give some of my yoga friends $1 million in cash as a surprise. They had recently developed lottery fever and insisted that I try my luck, so I played along without realizing that I would actually win. When I saw the winning numbers, I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't sleep at all. Put aside $3 million for my retirement and split the remaining amount equally between Luna and Logan. Somewhere between thinking and waiting, I fell asleep on the couch. I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep when my phone rang. And it was Luna. I answered, but before I could say anything, she said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. Work was crazy today, and I just couldn't step away. It's too late now, so I'll just head back to my apartment. You should go to bed early." I looked at the screen and saw that it was 11:47 p.m. before the call ended. Since Luna worked far from home and I was concerned about her lengthy travel, I rented her an apartment close to her workplace once her internship finished. I spent a considerable amount of time staring at the dark screen. 10 more minutes went by, and Logan, I sighed, stretched my aching back, and slowly got up. I wrapped plastic wrap around every untouched dish on the table and carefully put them in the refrigerator. I also tucked the real estate contracts and checks in my bedside drawer. By the time I was ready to go to bed, it was almost 1 a.m. And suddenly the birthday I had been so excited to celebrate was over. When I woke up the following morning, my phone was silent and had no birthday messages. After breakfast, I went for a walk and ran into my neighbor Mary, who was out walking her dog. She smiled at me and asked, "You're usually out bright and early. What took you so long today?" I gave her an awkward smile, too embarrassed to admit that I'd stayed up late waiting for my children. From Luna or Logan, I sent a message in our family group chat, "It's Saturday, come home for dinner, I have a surprise for you," but no one responded. When I didn't respond, she went on, "I told you ages ago to just book a nice dinner at a hotel, less stress, less hassle, but no, you insisted. Logan likes spicy food, Luna likes sweet and sour, and your granddaughter needs a healthy kids meal. Do you think a fancy restaurant can't handle that honestly? You go through all this trouble just for them?" Her words stopped me in my tracks. For the first time, I really gave it any thought. Divorce, all these years, had I ever put myself first? Before I could think about that, a scathing voice interrupted the morning air, saying, "Oh, Mary, don't act like some poor self-sacrificing mother. He just loves to show off and is always bragging about how devoted Logan and Luna are." I turned to face the voice. It was Sammy, an old neighbor with whom I had never gotten along, and we had worked at the same fashion export company before I retired early, even competing for the position of European market manager. Since then, our relationship has been tense. Now, she looked me up and down, her lips curling in disgust. "I wonder how you've been treating yourself all these years." I had no interest in arguing with her, so I turned to Mary. "I'm going outside the neighborhood for a bit. You chat." I started to walk away. French was more fluent, and my skills outmatched hers. Sammy never accepted that. She thought I only won because of my language skills, not my abilities. But Sammy stepped in front of me. "I waited here all morning to do you a favor, so don't be ungrateful." She smirked and crossed her arms. "Last night, when it was my grandson's birthday, we had dinner at a restaurant, and guess what I saw was the most ridiculous show." I said, "Thanks for your concern, but I'm not interested. Can I leave?" Sammy's face darkened with annoyance. She took out her phone, scrolled through her album, and pushed the screen in my hand. "I don't I tried to push it back instinctively, but as soon as my eyes met the screen, I froze. It was a video of a woman in a red dress, with her hair styled elegantly up, smiling warmly as she greeted guests. I instantly recognized her as Chloe, my ex-husband Jeff Smith's mistress, standing next to her, holding her by the arms while they laughed. The camera shook for a moment before focusing on Logan and his biological father, Jeff, standing by the stage. Behind them, two banners with the words, "Happy 25th Wedding Anniversary, Jeff and Chloe, Happy Birthday," were displayed. My granddaughter. Chloe appeared on the screen, her tiny hands gripping Chloe's as she chirped sweetly, "Grandma Chloe, you're so pretty, way prettier and nicer than my other grandma," tilting her head up and her eyes full of innocent joy. "I want you to be my real grandma. If you and Grandpa could come watch me on our preschool sports day next week." There would be a deafening silence. The video ended, but Sammy wasn't finished. You should have seen Logan, who sneered and bought that old solid gold bracelet, which must have cost close to $10,000. I overheard his wife boasting about it on the phone in the bathroom, and she scoffed. "Oh, and he got Jeff a whole crate of Hennessy brandy, not cheap, Sammy." She shook her head and clicked her tongue, which is funny because every time he comes to visit you, he can't even bother to bring a six-pack of beer. In addition, your precious Luna, don't even get me started, gave Chloe a whole set of gold jewelry, including necklaces, earrings, rings, and more. She kept calling her mother as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and she turned to face me with a sickly sweet smile. The words hit like a sledgehammer, and I felt like I was drowning. I handed the phone back to Sammy without saying anything, and my legs were unsteady as I turned toward home, staggering forward in a daze. But Sammy yanked it away, and she snapped. "She needs to hear this, she needs to see the kind of ungrateful, backstabbing wolves she raised, constantly scrimping and saving for them, even selling her large house to help out." Wow, what a joke. My mouth was filled with a bitter, metallic taste, and I bit my lips so hard that they began to bleed. As soon as I entered the couch, the tears that had been suppressed for so long finally came out. I covered my face as though that would somehow stop the flood of agony that threatened to drown me, but no matter how hard I pressed my hands against my eyes, the past clawed its way to the surface. Cruel and relentless memories came rushing forward like a rogue carousel, removing old wounds I had been pretending didn't exist for years. At 24, I was only a proofreader at a publishing house and not even a full-time employee. My parents saw Jeff Smith as the perfect match, a respectable, well-employed man who could even help my older brother's career, and he was 6 years older than me. He was a tall, clean-cut man with an air of stability and a bright future ahead of him. Jeff Smith had been a disaster, so much so that by the time I turned 40, I had given up on the idea of love completely. I divorced him and never remarried. Told me I was fortunate to marry him, so I agreed without really knowing much about his past. I didn't find out until it was too late, but Jeff had never married before me because he had once been so deeply in love that he couldn't move on or fully commit to any relationship that followed. Marrying me had just been convenient, and by the time I realized this, there was no turning back. A year after we met, we were already married, and while we weren't particularly affectionate, we coexisted peacefully. The third spring of our marriage, I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. This threw me headfirst into motherhood, leaving me feeling overwhelmed, with 2 crying infants, sleepless nights, and a body still healing from childbirth. I felt like I was drowning, and I wanted to return to work. I told Jeff that stability, predictability, and safety were more important than a whirlwind romance. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and by the end of the year, Laura still hadn't arrived at my publishing house. When I didn't return, they gave my position to someone else, leaving me heartbroken but powerless. Then came the twins' first birthday party, and Laura didn't show up. Every time I brought it up, he made excuses, saying that his father was ill and his mother was too busy to spare the time. When Jeff finally explained to me that night that his mother had hurt her lower back in a fall while cleaning the house and had been recovering in bed for the entire time because she didn't want to worry us, guilt struck me like a wave. I had been angry at her, suspecting her of being indifferent, but after the party, Jeff's aunt came over to see the kids, and I pulled her aside out of concern. She was their grandmother, but she had hardly visited them in a whole year. Jeff must have sensed my mood because she had hardly ever visited them. Tightening my chest, I asked, "How bad is Laura's injury? Maybe she should come to a hospital. In San Francisco?" As I was speaking, I reached into my purse and took out $1,000. "Could you give this to her when you return, just in case she needs anything?" Jeff's aunt hesitated for a long time, a strange expression that was half amusement and half pity. Finally, she let out a small laugh. "Doesn't have a back injury." I looked at her in confusion, and she sighed and gave me a look that I couldn't quite interpret. I wasn't going to say anything, but every time I visit, I see you struggling to raise those babies by yourself, and it irritates me." He looked around before leaning in, and I realized that Jeff had set up his mother to work as a free babysitter. Jeff's aunt said, voice low for my stomach. The aunt nodded, and a suffocating weight settled on my chest. She sighed again, then whispered, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but keep an eye on Jeff, make sure no one steals." "I feel like something sharp and cold lodged itself in my throat," she said flatly, "possibly Jeff's boss." Jeff travels a lot, and his wife needed help with their kids, so Jeff sent his mother to take care of them. The words from Jeff's aunt were like a thorn stuck deep in my skin that night, and I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The following morning, after Jeff left for work, I entered his study. I hardly ever went in here except for cleaning, and even then, I never touched his personal belongings. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and she patted my arm before leaving. I stood there frozen, watching her retreating figure, unable to breathe. Felt that personal space should exist even in marriage. The study was merely furnished with 2 walls lined with bookshelves, a desk, and a chair. I sat down and opened his desk drawer, which contained a few letters, his office's metal badge, an address book, and some irrelevant documents. At the very bottom of the drawer, I discovered a black and white photo, which I carefully removed. It showed 5 people, Jeff standing next to a young woman with long hair braided into 2 plaits and a white floral blouse with ruffled sleeves. I didn't need anyone to tell me that the unspoken connection between them was undeniable, it was a woman's intuition. Maybe I turned the picture over and noticed the delicate, elegant handwriting in the bottom right corner. It read, "Are bound by heart love buried deep," and it was probably hers. It was April 19, 1969, Jeff's senior year of college. My eyes swept across the study until they found a locked cabinet at the bottom of the bookshelf, and a few minutes later, I discovered the key concealed in the spine of how the steel was tempered that night. After putting the twins to bed, I made myself sit down and read dozens of letters. That was only about a third of them. The woman who had written to Jeff was named Chloe, and from her words, I pieced together a love story that had lasted for more than 10 years. They came from the same small town, left home for the same university in a strange city far from family and friends, and eventually fell in love in quiet, unsaid moments until they were inseparable. But prior to Chloe leaving for college, her family had already set her up with a fiancé. She accepted the engagement, and her betrothed sent her letters every month, sometimes even sending money for her studies. As a result, their love had to stay hidden because most students went back home to find employment after graduation. Chloe's fiancé's family had connections and money, so they were able to get her a position teaching French at a prestigious private school, while Jeff, after 2 years of applications, was accepted to a prestigious university up north for when I was first pregnant with the twins. Chloe wrote to Jeff about how tired she was of juggling work and childcare. Her husband was constantly away on business trips and hardly acknowledged their presence, leaving her exhausted and constantly sore from carrying the burden alone. Jeff's heart ached for her and sent his mother, Laura, to help raise Chloe's daughter, whom revelation alone was enough to shatter. Every time Laura looks after me, I feel both guilty and happy. I want to call her mom, but I'm not sure how. I feel awful for your wife, who makes barely $1,500 a month, but you still send me $500 in secret. If she ever found out, she would lose it. You mentioned that your wife had twins, but the only thing I've ever witnessed give birth to 2 at once is my dog. My coworkers make fun of me for always receiving so many letters, which I tell them are from my husband, my love. They assume I'm referring to Bruce, the man I married, because the inked words are a forbidden intimacy, a humid, suffocating closeness that made me physically ill. That night, when Jeff got home, I threw the letters in his face, screaming, fighting. It was a war zone. I had just given birth. I was emotionally and physically spent, and now I was falling apart. I didn't even have the luxury of breaking down because he stood there, his face impassive, watching my breakdown with a chilling detachment, as if I were a stranger. Only after I had worn out my voice, trembling from rage, did he finally sigh in irritation, asking in a bored tone, "Are you done? There's nothing between the US, just letters, so if it bothers you so much, I'll stop writing them." When I went to the kitchen, the can of formula was empty, and I felt a crushing wave of despair wash over me. I had been reminding Jeff for days that we were running low on formula, and I had pleaded with him to pick some up on his way home. Jeff was crying in their room, locking himself in his study, and ignoring everything. I wiped my swollen eyes and forced myself to get up. Jeff was sitting at his desk, slowly tracing his fingers over Chloe's face in a photograph. His eyes, full of love and longing, froze when he saw me. I snatched the photo from his hands, tore it to pieces, and threw the scraps at his feet. I had reminded him again the morning before he left for work, but he had forgotten. Now that it Was too late, something inside of me snapped, and I stormed to his study and kicked the locked door open with all my strength. He froze when I screamed, "You are a lying, heartless bastard," and when he finally woke up, he panicked and frantically gathered the ripped pieces of Chloe's face, carefully tucking them into his pocket as if they were the most valuable thing in the world. Then he turned on me, his face contorted with fury, and he bellowed, a hysterical, irrational shrew, and attempted to rush past me. I grabbed his. I was unprepared for the force that sent me flying backward, my lower back slamming against the sharp corner of the desk. A searing pain shot through me, and for a moment, my vision went completely white through the haze. I saw Jeff hesitate for a second, then he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. His eyes were red with rage, and he shoved me hard with both hands. The next day, I wrote a letter to Jeff's workplace, City Hall, reporting his inappropriate relationships, but it was like throwing a pebble into the ocean. I received no response, and when I happened to run into Jeff's supervisor, the man had the gall to reprimand me, implying that I was being unreasonable. I don't remember how I survived that night, only the chaos, the agony, and the constant cries of my children, their tiny voices piercing my eardrums like needles. I sought assistance from the local women's support group, but at the time, people weren't as willing to step in and help a marriage unless there was undeniable immediate danger. Jeff's affair was just letters, not actual cheating, and my children were still very young, so they advised me to be patient and endure. He told me that if I aired our private matters in public, I should handle any disagreements at home. In the grand scheme of things, I was a caged animal desperately trying to get out, but every door I tried was locked. My parents and brother were adamant about my divorce, saying that every woman experiences this and that it will pass once the children are older. Jeff works hard enough as it is, and you don't even have a job, so stop causing him trouble. He didn't even bring that woman home, so what exactly are you complaining about, Jeff, every time? The children were too young to comprehend and sucked on their tiny fingers, babbling their first words, unaware of the growing rift between their parents. For their sake, I repeatedly swallowed my pride, as so many women are trapped in broken marriages. I had become weak the moment I became a mother, and I had two weaknesses for 7 years, slow quiet and exhaustion. Eventually, he simply moved out into a dorm near City Hall and only came home once every 10 days or so. I read his words, and for the first time I felt something snap inside of me. We didn't even have a semi-automatic washing machine in the dead of winter, and I was still cleaning my kids' dirty clothes by hand, my fingers raw from the cold. That night I confronted Jeff, who had secretly sent Chloe an additional $4,000 to buy herself the newest fully automated washing machine. However, the letter had been returned to sender, Chloe had transferred to a new school, and the post office had returned it. When he lost control, the furniture was overturned, and a vase was thrown at my head, and it broke just inches behind me. I didn't think twice and called the police and a local news station to ask them to report on how my violent husband had almost disfigured me. The scandal broke out, spreading like wildfire to not only City Hall but also the state government. And Jeff's transfer to a higher state-level position was immediately revoked. Jeff refused to let go of Logan for 2 months before he finally sat down and agreed to a divorce. Jeff said, "If you want a divorce, I keep our son." I agreed, but when it came to money, I was brutal and threatened to reveal his affair with Chloe in order to damage her reputation. His career stagnated as younger, better-educated officials entered City Hall, and he was demoted. He spent years stuck as an administrative assistant filing paperwork in the archives. Jeff, of course, didn't want Chloe to suffer, but he also couldn't bear the embarrassment of borrowing money from friends, so he mortgaged his parents' house and took out a loan for $50,000. I'll never forget his expression when he handed me that check. It looked like I would have died 1,000 times. In the end, I made him return every cent he had spent on her. I had no way of knowing the exact amount, but I threw out a figure of $50,000. When my father learned that I had actually gone through with the divorce, he became furious and never came to see me again. The house we had lived in before our marriage belonged to Jeff, so I left it behind, but I took everything inside, including the old stew pot that had been patched up twice. I then took everything to the flea market and sold everything I had left, and with Luna in my arms, I walked away. Logan was taken in by Jeff's parents from that day on. I was disappointed, but I no longer pleaded for love that would never come. The road ahead was uncertain, difficult, and unforgiving, but at least I had freed myself from that repulsive, rotting marriage. At least I was no longer the abandoned wife in someone else's love story, pitifully trying to hang on after the divorce. Mother would sneak visits behind his back, but she never offered support, only endless sighs and tearful laments. I bought a 650-square-foot apartment with the money I had secured. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I also bought some furniture and moved Luna to a new school. After everything was in order, I focused on something I had been eager to repay. I wrote a letter of commendation to Bruce, Chloe's husband, praising his wife's unwavering kindness, her years of tender care, and his dedication to Jeff. Bruce wasted no time in filing for divorce right away. When the judge broke down in tears and revealed that his wife had been involved in a lengthy extramarital affair, unlike what I had gone through, no one told him to put up with it or wrote it off as a few letters. Instead, everyone denounced Chloe as shameless, immoral, and a disgrace, and their divorce was finalized quickly. At the same time, Chloe was fired from her teaching position after it was alleged that she had accepted bribes from students' parents, whether she did or not. I got a job as a merchandise coordinator at an apparel export company, but I didn't bother following their lives after that because I was too busy building mine. I had to learn French, master international trade and balance, and raise Luna, so there wasn't time for gossip about people I had long since left behind. 5 years later, I was promoted to head of European sales operations, but Jeff never advanced. He stayed in the same unchanging position at City Hall with no prospects for advancement. He eventually married Chloe and even took out a loan to give her a lavish wedding, but Logan suffered the most from their union. Whenever Logan and Chloe had a disagreement, Jeff would always side with Chloe. I will never forget that night on Christmas Eve years ago when Logan came to my house with his clothes ripped, his backpack dirty, and his little hands frozen. As soon as he saw me, he threw himself into my arms and sobbed, "Mom, I detest that house." With Christmas approaching, Chloe had prepared roast beef ribs for dinner. Logan couldn't resist the smell and snuck a piece. When Jeff got home and heard what had happened, he didn't chastise Chloe at all. Instead, he reprimanded Logan, telling him that it was wrong to steal food. Chloe, emboldened, had smugly ordered Logan to stand outside in the cold to reflect. It was freezing outside, and Logan was humiliated and furious. Chloe was obviously overjoyed when he refused to return to his father's house. I'm not sure what she told Jeff, but the man who had once fought tooth and nail to keep his son stopped resisting abruptly and sent over all of Logan's belongings. He ran straight to me, "Mom," asking if I could stay with you and never return, looking at his teary face and pale, chapped lips. It felt like I had shed my last tear that night outside the window as the darkness slowly swallowed the last traces of daylight. Jeff continued to send child support checks for the first 2 years, but one day they stopped coming, and that was it. I raised both of my children alone, taught them right from wrong, put them through school, and saved money to buy them cars, even homes, but they betrayed me just like their father did. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling, as I made my way to as I lay in bed in the bedroom. I felt like a fish desperately trying to breathe, and then the sound of keys turning in the lock reverberated throughout the quiet house. Luna's voice followed Mom, and when we returned, I didn't move or respond to Logan's perplexed voice. Next, Mom wasn't home, and she didn't tell us to come for dinner this morning. Why hadn't she even prepared dinner? Luna sighed, wondering why she's been so sentimental every time they continued talking in low voices, and then my bedroom door creaked open, revealing a small, warm body carrying Harold to me. "Grandma, are you playing hide-and-seek with us? I found you the best." Around her, I feel suffocated. It's so much easier being with Chloe. She keeps her voice down because if Mom hears you, she'll be upset. What if she is? Both Logan and Luna hurried in after the voices in the living room abruptly stopped. The light flicked on, and Logan froze, standing on the floor and staring at me. His mother was lying in bed, her face streaked with dried tears, his lips parted, and his voice barely above a whisper. Mom Luna hesitated in the doorway, her expression unreadable, and after a long moment, she cautiously stepped forward, reaching for my hand. "Mom, I'm sorry," she whispered. "We couldn't come because we were so busy yesterday. Are you upset with us?" I stared at her without blinking, and she shrank under my gaze, her voice getting smaller. "Mom," she said, "I had to work overtime, it wasn't my choice. You know, this is a big time for my career." Logan quickly added, "Yes, Mom, we really did have to work, but we're here now, aren't we? We came to celebrate with you today, so get up and have some cake." I looked at them closely, but all I saw was Jeff lying. "Grandma, I want cake." Vivian pulled at me with her tiny hands, her impatience almost dragging me off the bed. Logan swiftly slipped my slippers onto the floor and helped me sit up, his voice full of forced words. The way they twisted their words in an attempt to placate me was as easy as he had once done. Had I been fighting against something impossible all along? Had all my efforts, love, sacrifices, and endless nights of working myself to the bone for them meant nothing against the weight of their bloodline? The moment her dance class ended, I brought her straight here. They half led and half dragged me to the dining table, where a 6-inch cartoon cake with the design of Elsa from Frozen was sitting. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I realized what a fool I had been for more than 30 years. "Warmth, Mom. Vivian has been so excited all day about celebrating your birthday. He kept saying how much she missed you. I hated Jeff so much that night that I wanted to leave, but when I saw my kids, I couldn't, so I stayed and fought for them for years. I learned French international trade. This was after my fight with Jeff, the empty can of formula on the kitchen counter, and the twins' desperate gasping cries. I had fought through the pain in my bruised back, cooking oatmeal with one arm while rocking them with the other. One arm would finally fall asleep, only to be woken up by the other's cries. The only birthday cake I received was whatever my 5-year-old granddaughter happened to bring, so I pulled out a chair and sat down, suppressing the pain rising in my chest. I had also fought tooth and nail against Sammy for that manager promotion, but now they had gone to that woman's birthday party and given her gold bracelets, expensive liquor, and an entire jewelry set that set me at 66. I said, "Sit down, I have something to say." Logan and Luna looked at each other, then reluctantly sat across from me. Vivian thought we were going to start eating, but she looked at the Elsa figurine on the cake, her eyes bright with anticipation. I looked directly at my kids, and they immediately changed their expressions. "You didn't come yesterday because you were at their anniversary party, weren't you?" Luna asked cautiously, her brows furrowed. Voice steady. "If you wanted to be at their celebration, you could have simply told me that there was no need to lie about working late and make me wait until midnight." Luna's face went pale, and Logan lowered his head in guilt. After a few minutes of intense silence, Luna started crying. She moved across the table to sit next to me, holding my hand tightly, and she begged, "Mom, let the past go. You have to stop holding on to this. Dad has connections and resources, he can help me and Logan." "Why?" She looked at me and said, "If I can't rely on Dad, am I supposed to rely on you?" I stared at her as if I were seeing her for the first time. Logan had settled down young and then got married shortly after. Should we struggle when we could ask him for help, Mom? We've had it hard too. Can't you try to understand us? Her tears fell onto my hand, burning my skin like fire. "I'm getting married next year." Luna, however, had attended graduate school and then threw herself into her career, always pushing herself farther and harder. The more educated she became, the more successful she became, and the more she weighed the pros and cons before making every decision. She shifted uneasily under my eyes, avoiding my eyes and instead staring at the Elsa cake. She whispered, "Mom, I've been holding this in for a long time. If you hadn't caused that scene at City Hall, Dad never would have divorced you, Logan. And I wouldn't have had to go through what we did, and Dad wouldn't have become a low-ranking government employee until the day he retired. If you had just persisted, things would have turned out differently for all of us." Luna stopped Logan from snapping, flinching, and then laughing bitterly. "Am I mistaken?" She shot back. "If Mom hadn't insisted on leaving Dad, Chloe wouldn't have had a chance to take her place, but Mom made her decision at the time, so why is she still harboring resentment?" She clenched her fists. "She wasn't a homewrecker years after your divorce, of course." Her face was flushed, and her voice rose in passionate defense. Then, she turned back to me, "Mom, stop burying yourself in your own resentment. No matter what you say, you can't pass your hatred on to Logan and me. Dad is still our father." I stared at her, and my fingers trembled as I gestured to the door. "Get out, you two. I don't have kids." Like you, there was a long, oppressive silence before Luna slowly got to her feet. Her voice was eerily calm, and she said, Mom, we should all take some time to cool off. I won't be coming back for a while." She took the cake from the table and called out to Vivian, "Vivian, let's go have the cake at Andy's place." Vivian hesitated, looked at me, and then slowly slid out of her chair and put her hand in Luna's, and they walked toward the door. Logan lingered outside Luna's, impatient as the door started to close. I heard Vivian's small voice asking if Grandma no longer wanted us. Luna's response was incisive and thoughtful, "That's right, you don't have a grandma anymore." Vivian cheered, indicating that Chloe is my real grandma. "Tomorrow, I'll ask Grandpa and Grandma Chloe to attend my school's sports day." Logan's voice said, "Hurry up, what are you waiting for?" He picked up his coat and looked at me. "Mom, just calm down," and then he left as well. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door as the voices faded. No matter how hard I tried to push them out of my mind, the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. The pain in my chest was excruciating, but I would get used to it. I had survived worse. I slowly steadied myself by pushing off my knees to stand, and I went to the drawer, took out the 2 real estate contracts I had prepared for them, and tore them to shreds. If they had their father now, I had no reason to care. I went to a law firm on Monday morning and hired an attorney to draft my will, which stated that all of my assets would be donated to charity upon my death. I also listed Logan and his wife's house, which was still under my name, for sale because they weren't home. I used my spare key to allow the real estate agent to take pictures of the property, and as I was leaving the office, my phone rang. It was the realtor I had spoken to about the opulent villa, Miss Isabel. We're offering 2 years of free property management services if you finish the purchase this month. I politely declined, saying I wouldn't be proceeding with the purchase. The salesperson pressed me for an explanation, but I hardly paid attention because my thoughts had already wandered to a few years prior, when Logan got married and I sold my old house, which I had purchased decades earlier for $60,000. Thanks to the good school district, I was able to sell it for that amount. I had intended to use the $250,000 as a down payment on a house for Logan and his wife, but they weren't happy with that and were also interested in my bank account. They even wanted me to take out a mortgage in my name to entice me, offering to put my name on the deed and make me the primary mortgage holder. I declined, saying that I gave them 2 options: either I paid the down payment, but they would handle the mortgage themselves, and the deed would be in their names, or I took out the mortgage in my name, but the house would still be fully owned by me, and they could live there. Would rent somewhere else when I passed, and the property would be divided equally between Logan and Luna. They argued for days before deciding on the second option, and Luna was never shortchanged. She went to a private university where the tuition alone cost $155,000 annually after graduating, and I paid for her living expenses, travel, and personal expenses during the 2 years before graduate school. I must have spent at least $100,000 on her even now. I thought that after I retired, I would have a $5,000 monthly pension that would keep growing. I also had long-term care insurance and a fixed annuity plan that would pay out principal and interest when I turned 70, ensuring I had a secure future. I never denied them anything, not once, and now that I look back, I realize what a fool I had been for a lifetime of working, giving, and sacrificing only to be betrayed by the very people who took advantage of me. For the first time in my life, I lived alone, but peace never lasts long. My phone was soon inundated with calls from Logan, so I blocked his number. A short while later, my phone rang again, this time from Michelle, his wife. I hesitated, then answered, but there were still a few things I wanted to say. I ended my lease on my rental apartment and bought myself a move-in-ready villa, a comfortable home with a private garden. I also hired a housekeeper to handle housekeeping duties. Logan's angry voice surged over the speaker as soon as the call connected. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? How could you send a lawyer and a realtor to our house? Are you really selling our house? Have you lost your mind?" Logan's entitled outrage made my stomach turn. He wasn't asking. He was demanding, and he was acting as though I owed him something. "Luna always said you were difficult," and he sneered. "I used to defend you, but now I realize she was right, just because we missed your birthday. That's why Dad left." Even though I had already given up on them, his words still made me feel angry. I laughed coldly. "Perfect, since you've chosen Aunt Chloe, let her buy you a house. Then that house is legally mine, and I'm selling it, so pack up and move out, otherwise, my lawyer will be filing charges for illegal occupancy." I hesitated, after which I added, "Oh, and do pass a message to Luna, her landlord has been asking about her next rent payment." "I won't be doing that." I stopped covering it before he could spit out another protest, so I hung up, blocked all of their numbers, turned off my phone, and for the first time in my life, I allowed silence to be my companion. That weekend, I adopted 2 cats from a pet rescue center, filled my garden with flowers, shrubs, and vines, and one afternoon, I sat on my balcony with a cat curled in my lap, enjoying the warm sunlight, when my housekeeper knocked on the door. When I went downstairs, I discovered that Logan and Luna had been unable to get in touch with me for months and had reported me missing in front of me. The officers called Logan to let him know that I was safe, and an hour later they showed up at my door, not just Logan, but also Luna and someone I never expected to see, my older brother Jack. After the police left, the 3 of them stood in my garden, surveying the house with wide eyes, and Luna was the first to break the silence. "Mom." Logan looked unkempt, his face shadowed with stubble, his clothes wrinkled and disheveled, and Luna didn't look much better. I sighed, "What do you want?" and left. "You're not welcome here." "How much do you make as a housekeeper here?" I rolled my eyes and ignored her. It had been months since I last saw them. Logan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Mom, don't you think it's time to drop this? The lawyer actually sued me over the house, and now Michelle is threatening?" A month ago, my lawyer told me that Logan was refusing to leave, so I filed a lawsuit against him. I met his gaze without hesitation and told him that if he moved out within 3 days, I would withdraw the lawsuit. Logan looked shocked, as if he couldn't believe I was being this cruel, but before he could react, Luna stepped forward and held out an expectant hand, telling him to stop. "Promise to give it to me, and now that Lucifer and I have bought a new House in need the money for renovations, I laughed and shook my head. She had money for gold jewelry for another woman, but she still had my money. I told her icily, your mother is Chloe, if you need help buying a house or organizing a wedding, go ask her. Luna's face turned red with anger. I won't be giving you any cent. She scoffed, saying, you know what? Chloe is a better mother than you ever were, she's prettier, kinder, and more loving. When I get married, Dad and Chloe will be sitting in the parents' seats. As for you, come or don't, I don't care. Then, without waiting for my response, her tone became harsh and cruel. You think we actually want to come to you? We were giving you a chance to make amends, but clearly you'd rather be stubborn. Fine. But don't come crawling back when you're old and alone, don't expect us to take care of you, she said. She said something that should have hurt, but it didn't anymore. I watched her go, wiping imaginary dust off my sleeve, and as I turned to go back inside, I saw two figures standing in my yard. Logan was standing there, frozen in thought, watching the entire spectacle with amusement, who was obviously enjoying the show. I had almost forgotten about him. I had known for a long time that Jack's life hadn't been easy these past few years because my parents had spoiled him rotten. Initially, my father had pulled strings to get him a good government job, but Jack was incompetent, lazy, and often skipped work, so it wasn't long before he was fired. My parents then funded a number of small businesses for him, some of which were successful and some of which weren't, but by that time he had struck gold by starting a wholesale food business that took off. However, just as he was starting to make real money, he fell in love with a woman who defrauded him of everything he owned, and his wife divorced him, taking half of what little he had left. Now, he was standing in my garden when he saw me. He gave me a greasy smile and said, Isabel, Mom and Dad miss you and want you to come home and visit. I narrowed my eyes because something wasn't right. Jack had never been concerned about family ties, so why was he suddenly playing messenger? He took a step forward and spoke in a voice full of fake warmth. Dad doesn't hold a grudge against you anymore, he said, because he's just stubbornly divorcing you. Look around you, everyone is doing it. I almost burst out laughing now that he was divorced. He had conveniently forgotten how he once made fun of me for leaving Jeff. I got right to the point, Jack. If there's nothing else you can do, get out. Jack hesitated, then sighed, rubbing his hands together in that familiar, sleazy way. Okay, I won't mince words. Dad fell while out for a walk, and the doctors say he might end up dead. Mom believes you should return and take care of him because you always complained that they favored me. Now is your chance to spend some time with them, made me laugh out loud in shock. If I recall correctly, their combined retirement benefits are almost $10,000 per month. You're telling me that they can't afford a caregiver? Jack's face twisted in frustration. If we hire a nurse, how am I supposed to survive? I'm 68 years old. Isabel, and you expect me to go out and work, but even with my father immobilized and my mother getting older and frail, the money still had to go to their beloved golden son. Where were they, Jack, when Jeff was destroying my life and I was struggling to survive? All of a sudden, they remembered they had a daughter. I shrugged, saying that their predicament had nothing to do with me and that I wouldn't be returning. Please leave. Jack's face darkened. Isabel, I had already consulted a lawyer, and even if you've been apart from them for years, you are still legally required to support them. I smiled indifferently, and if a judge saw this, they would sue me. Orders me to pay, and I'll comply, but until then, not a single penny. I called security, and they escorted him out, as expected. Jack never filed a lawsuit because he was too lazy to put in the effort. Instead, he dumped our parents into a dilapidated nursing home, telling the staff to make sure they didn't die because he still needed their pension checks to survive. 2 months later, I got a call from an unknown number, and when I answered, the voice on the other end was Belle-slurred, and I froze. It had been years since I had heard that nickname, so I held the phone without saying anything. I don't have much time left, but before I leave, I wanted to apologize for his labored breathing and painful gasps. He said, I don't listen to a single word of it. His words were more than I had ever heard him say in my entire life. My father had always been a controlling, chauvinistic man. He believed that women were only meant to be dependent on men. So he prevented me from divorcing because he didn't want me to be the one to ruin his otherwise prosperous life. On his deathbed, he wanted to apologize, but his words felt like a wet, frozen coat being draped over my shoulders, not to console me, but to remind me of the cold I had already endured alone, and I didn't need it. I hesitated for a long time before I hung up, but I finally went. When I got to his room, I saw him lying there, hollow and gaunt, his cheeks sunken like a dried-up corpse. I hadn't seen him in over 10 years, the last time being on his 70th birthday. I had brought him gifts, but he had always thrown them out the door. I never returned after that, and now as I stood by his bed, his lips quivered and his breathing became shallower. After a few minutes, he closed his eyes and let two muddy tears fall down his withered face. I turned and left as I entered the hall, and my mother, who is now 85 years old and shaky with age, shuffled after me. I looked at her and felt nothing because she had always been obedient to my father no matter what he did, not even when he threw me out like trash. Was she weak, or did she not love me enough? I wondered if my father had ever threatened to sever his relationship with Jack, would she have complied? Just as blindly, I took out a $10,000 check from my bag and pressed it into her hand for his funeral, which I would not be attending. I then turned and left, leaving her sobbing softly behind me as she trailed into the empty corridor. I opened a large cafe bookstore that was over 3,000 square feet in size. Since I was only 66, I couldn't just sit around eating and drinking while waiting for time to run out during renovations, so I made sure that every seat had power outlets. It wasn't a very profitable business, but it didn't lose money either. One day, while I was working at the counter, I saw Michelle walk in hand with a man I didn't recognize. They looked intimate, and when she saw me, her expression froze. She immediately let go of the man's hand, but after a moment of hesitation, she did not. The shelves were piled high with books, and the air was thick with the rich scent of coffee. I hired students working part-time and people with disabilities who needed jobs. She laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "Logan and I are going through a divorce. Hyun has been seeing a woman Chloe introduced him to for a long time. I only started dating my boyfriend after that." I nodded, saying that I had nothing to say and that I didn't care about Logan and Luna's lives anymore. Michelle sighed, then turned to her boyfriend, "Let's go somewhere else." As they left, I quietly sighed, hoping that Logan wouldn't regret his decisions when Luna got married. I wasn't invited, but a friend sent me a video from the wedding and a message asking why Chloe was sitting in the mother's seat at Luna's wedding. I said, "I guess I don't deserve to be there." My friend hesitated for a while, and eventually they just sent a sad emoji. I won't lie, watching that video hurt, but more than that, I felt relief because something inside of me completely let go at that moment, and my cafe bookstore became a local sensation, drawing crowds of people. They came up with monthly themed drinks: January Golden Fortune Latte, February Sweetheart Mocha, March Coffee and Tea Fusion, and the literary ambience. The young employees were eager to experience the cozy atmosphere and worried that business wasn't thriving. The themes worked wonders, and soon local travel bloggers and social media influencers started recommending the cafe, and I noticed that it was bustling every day. Luna discovered who owned the cafe after seeing a news interview about me, and by the time she came looking for me, she was heavily pregnant. She ordered an iced Americano, so I had the barista pour her a glass of warm water instead. She didn't object, and we sat across from each other. She gave me a small smile before tears filled her eyes. "I think I made a mistake, Mom." I took a sip of my coffee. Una looked off, her eyes were swollen, her complexion was pale, a big bruise covered her forehead, her lips trembled, and then she started crying. "Mom. Lucifer had cheated on me," I thought. Lucifer had always seemed like a nice, mild guy, but Luna's next words broke that trust. "I'm 4 months pregnant, but the woman he's seeing is already about to give birth. He's been busy with work, but really he's last weekend. I drove 3 hours to see him, and when I arrived, I saw them together. Jeff hadn't been able to get Lucifer a government job because, after I asked, 'Did you tell your father?' Chloe Luna's eyes widened in shock, and I went on, 'Your father has connections, so you should ask him to stand up for you.' He stared at me in shock, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. 'Mom, are you the one who left me first?' So I got up and spoke calmly. 'This isn't a recycling center, so you can't come and go as you want.' Before I left, I gave her one final piece of advice: if no one is willing to help you, save yourself and leave that man as soon as possible. I told her that before a woman can live a good life on her own, she will be fine, and time will fly by in the blink of an eye. The number of cats in my care increased, and the majority of them were discovered abandoned at the entrance to my cafe. The young people who worked for me were nice, at least as their boss, and they showed me warmth and respect. I didn't expect sincerity because it's uncommon and cannot be forced, and that was okay. However, life took its toll on Jeff Smith, who one evening suffered a stroke while leaving his house to pick up Chloe from the mall. The damage was severe. Paralysis on one side, slurred speech, and limited mobility. Chloe initially appeared to be very loyal and stayed for a while, managing his medical care and finances. However, despite his pension and savings, the costs of medical care quickly mounted, and Jeff became a burden. Chloe, who had previously stolen him from another woman, wasn't the kind to give up her life for a sick husband, and she eventually had enough. Logan had his own issues after his divorce from Michelle. He had jumped into a new relationship hoping for a fresh start, but his new girlfriend had no interest in a broke, struggling man. When it became clear that he was drowning in debt, she cut her losses and left him now stuck with a disabled father. Logan packed her bags, emptied what little was left of their joint account, and left him with one last sentence: "I didn't sign up for this." He was barely making ends meet, living in a small apartment, and taking care of Jeff was draining. Logan hated every minute of it, and eventually he turned to Luna for support. However, Luna had already changed. She had divorced Lucifer as soon as her son was born because she knew she didn't want to raise him in a broken marriage like her mother had, so she left the city and moved somewhere new where no one knew her past. It was difficult to balance work, motherhood, and all the challenges of being a single parent, but at last she started to realize the sacrifices her mother had made. She remembered clearly the long nights when she stayed up rocking her and Logan to sleep, the cold winters when she hand-washed their clothes because they couldn't afford a washing machine, the gentle lullabies, the sleepless nights, and the tireless work just to give them a better future. She had never appreciated it before, but now she did. She didn't expect forgiveness, but something inside her kept hoping, so every few months she sent another message: "I understand now everything you did for us. You must have been so tired. I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know. I think about you." She texted her mother, "Mom, how have you been?" but received no response. Weeks later, she tried again, and this time, she apologized for everything, but she didn't receive a response. "I read every message, but I never responded because some wounds are too deep to be healed." However, that didn't mean I wished her suffering. Rather, I hoped that one day she would find the strength to stand on her own 2 feet and live for herself, not for a man or for approval, but because she deserved to live a happy life beyond my cafe bookstore flourished, and my house was a huddle of cozy books and my cat's gentle purring. My father, my ex-husband, and my kids were the ones who used to drag me down, but they no longer ran my life. I endured loss, betrayal, and suffering. But I made it through. And I now lived for myself after a lifetime of selflessness, sacrifice, and perseverance. I now choose joy, no more burdens or regrets, just the straightforward enjoyment of a good cup of coffee, a calm afternoon, and the realization that I had at last mastered the art of freedom after everything.